Guys, I'm sorry to freak you out, but I know a lot about you just because you clicked on this video. Number one, you're as addicted to Marvel Snap as the rest of us are. And number two, you're tired of losing to competition that you feel like you could outplay if you either had the right cards or you had the right strategy. And fear no more, I've got both of them set up for you with my stack pack, a very easy to implement combo deck that will murder the competition. I'm still using it in gold ranks and bodying people with these cards. I'm going to explain to you the combo that this deck revolves around. I'm going to show you my build, explain to you why I've picked the cards that I've picked, show you spots where you could replace some of my cards with cards that you would prefer because yes, the deck is very adaptable. And then we're going to show you some matches where we maul with this combo deck. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the action. And of course, like every other YouTuber, if you guys like the video and you'd like to see more of this content, you know the buttons that you're supposed to be clicking. Let's stop wasting time and get into the build. So what is the general idea with the stack pack? Well, there are mainly two strategies that we are trying to take advantage of with this deck. Number one is going to be making sure that we always have cards and our opponent doesn't have any. There's a plethora of cards in here that revolve around stealing cards from our opponent or just completely obliterating theirs in the first place, meaning we will always have our combos and they will not have theirs because we will be taking key cards from them if RNG is in our favor. And then second, it revolves around one of the easiest to implement beginner strategies in Marvel Snap, which is the combination of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. You will see this play everywhere. A lot of people have keyed into it, but this deck helps facilitate it even better. To understand that play, Devil Dinosaur, a 5-cost, 3-power card that will gain +2 power per card in your hand. And the idea with this deck, again, is that we're always going to have a ridiculous amount of cards in our hand, meaning we're going to be optimizing this buff as much as possible. One of the best cards to help make that play consistent is Moon Girl because she will duplicate on reveal the amount of cards you have in your hand, which does one of two things. One, again, make sure that we get to double our hand, doubling the effect of the buff on Devil Dinosaur, but may also, with the right setup, give you a second Devil Dinosaur. At max buff, I believe he's 17 power, which means that you will have access to two 17 power Devil Dinosaurs in endgame. If you have Moon Girl and Devil Dino by turn 4, you drop Moon Girl, she gives you another Devil Dinosaur. Turn 5, you drop Devil Dinosaur. Turn 6, you drop Devil Dinosaur. Now, will you always have that play? No, and I wouldn't want to sit here and lie to you that you would. But the other cards we have in the build help cover your bases just in case that play isn't available. Let's go ahead and start looking at them. So we've got two 1-cost cards in this deck, both with 2 power, the first of which being Mantis. Mantis is an incredible card. If you call out the zone in which your opponent wants to place their card, you get to take a card from your opponent's deck. Again, remember the base strategy is we have cards and you don't. So you take a card away from them, add it to us, we have cards and you don't. Great for that. Of course, there's the stipulation that you need to call that zone out, but even if you miss, she is still a 1-cost 2 power, which means that you could play her turn 1 if your opponent does not have a turn 1 play. You get to start off the pressure. Only really big consistent counter to her is Electra, but we'll talk about that when we get into more gameplay matches and where specifically to place her to up the chance that you will call out their zone correctly. Card number 2 is going to be Yondu, and Yondu, same cost, same power as Mantis, but even easier to implement effect because it's not relying on calling out your opponent's play. You just have to play him somewhere on the board and you will snipe one of their cards. Now sure, we don't get their card, but if we don't get to have it, neither do they. For our 2-cost cards, we're going to start off with Cable. Cable, very similar in the sense that, again, we are taking their bottom card, but we're still taking away one of their cards and adding it to our deck. We take the card, you don't have it. In combination with Mantis and Yondu, you can essentially take away 3 of their cards if you have the right setup. That will take away 1/4 of their deck. Decks are only 12 cards in this game. That's very, very important into shutting down other people's combos. If we take from a destroyed deck, let's say Deathlock and Apocalypse and Angel, we very much limit the amount of potential they have to make big plays on us simply because we took away their access to the cards in the first place. And the best part is that they won't even know which cards we took, which means there's a better chance to bait them for extra cubes. It's just too good. Our last 2-cost card is going to come in the form of Sentinel. Sentinel, another card you'll have access to very early on in your Marvel Snap career. And the reason he's so important is because, again, we play him down. He's a 3-power card, but he will always give us another Sentinel in hand, meaning that we can drop 3 power and still pad our hand out with extra cards for that late game Devil Dinosaur play. We won't always be losing a card. Keep in mind that a lot of what we're doing here with Mantis and Yondu and Cable and Sentinel is essentially playing a card and always keeping another card in hand. If Mantis pops off, we play her, we get a card. Cable, we play her, we get a card. Sentinel, we always guarantee get a card. They might be better cards than we would pull from our own deck, depending on what our opponent is running. And on top of that, they buff Devil Dino for endgame. Now we've got 3-cost cards in the deck. I have tested different builds for this, and I'll explain later on why I went for more ongoing cards than on-reveal cards in this deck, but they pair better with Devil Dinosaur from my experience. And one of the best ongoing 3-cost cards you have in the game is Mr. Fantastic. You will see so many of your opponents running this because the card's ridiculous. You play him in one zone and you get 2 power to all zones ideally if you have the ability to place him in the center, which most games, at least 70% of the time, that middle zone is going to be available to you. If not, place him on the side, buff another zone. He can buff zones that you wouldn't normally have access to. And given some cards that we have later, you could potentially duplicate the effect of Mr. Fantastic and make him even stronger, but we'll get to that later. Now, one of my personal favorite cards in this game is the Punisher. He is great counterplay, especially for Khazar builds where they're focusing on spamming out 1-cost cards and trying to buff them the whole time. It's going to gain power for each card on your opponent's side. So if they drop an Ant-Man in that zone, you drop Punisher in the opposite zone because you know they're going to try to fill it. And you can, again, optimize his buff by making sure you place him in a zone that your opponent is going to try to force and fight for, making Punisher stronger and stronger. So he's a very solid counterplay to spam decks, and he's just a good card overall for his buff. And last but not least, this is one of the more recent picks for me out of my 3-cost cards. I used to play Ironheart in this position. I'll explain why later, but for now, Captain America, again, ongoing instead of on reveal, is essentially Punisher, but for your side instead of theirs. You can control where he's gonna go. He's always gonna have that buff. He starts off 3-3 instead of 3-2. He's easier to buff than Punisher because you have control over it. He's just overall a very good card. You can pull him without having to buy him. I know you'll see the pack. I spent $3 on the pack because I like this variant art, but you don't have to. You pull him pretty early in the game, and he's very, very good for this deck. Now, of course, we spoke about Moon Girl already, but she is one of the main essential combo pieces in this deck. You'll have her in hand more often than not. The game just likes to give her to you all the time, and she makes some of the best plays you'll have in the deck. Even if you don't have access to Devil Dinosaur, you can duplicate your access to other cards with ongoing effects and essentially double them. 2 Punishers means that counter spamming a zone is very solid. 2 Captain Americas means you're double buffing a zone. She is great almost in any deck that you play her in, but for this one specifically, she works wonders for you. Wait until you see the gameplay. And now this one's more of a personal choice. I'll give you some other options that you could play here later, but I've been a big fan of White Queen here. Draw, again, a copy of the highest card in your opponent's hand. So not only are you, again, padding your hand out with a card that will buff your Devil Dinosaur effect later, but you are taking most likely one of the most effective endgame cards that your opponent has. Even if you don't have the ability to play the card that you copy from your opponent, you know the potential of what they're going to play endgame. If they have a Hulk, by you having Hulk by proxy, you counter the Hulk by dropping 12 also. If they have Apocalypse, you know they're playing a Destroy deck. If they have the Infinite, you're going to want to know that Infinite is coming up later on in the game, and White Queen not only lets you steal the card for yourself, but also gives you a read on what you'll potentially be dealing with on the last turn. It's a very strong and effective card, doubly so for this deck, but just in general. Now we get into our 5 beaters. We're gonna have Iron Man, doubles the effect of a zone. Just picture this Devil Dinosaur in a zone with a 17 buff, and then Iron Man multiplying that effect with Devil Dinosaur, whatever else you put in that zone, plus a ×2 multiplier. If you need an end game condition, sometimes Iron Man can guarantee that win for you doubly, so if your opponent does not expect him coming. No surprise, Devil Dinosaur, we spoke about the buff already, so you should already be familiar with what this card does, but since we're going through everything, I figured I'd just throw it in as a reminder. He's in the deck, he's really important in the deck. Play Devil Dinosaur, wait till you see the gameplay. Now you can make a couple different decisions for your turn 6 card. I personally have been going with Onslaught. Spectrum is another good pick that could go. Again, we'll discuss this later after the gameplay where I discuss personal picks that you can make instead of what I play. But I tend to like to fight for 2 specific zones instead of trying to bust everything. And Onslaught is essentially a win condition in some zones where there's no other way you'd get the power to push over. My opponent could have 40 power in a zone and I could potentially beat that with the multiplier from Onslaught. Now, of course, it depends on the setup we get to play him, but he's a very strong win condition and the one I prefer personally. All right, so with all of that said, I think it's more than about time for us to start hopping in and showing you some matches and how ridiculous this deck can really be. Okay, so we're starting off here, and we're not gonna have a lot of turn 1 plays. You don't always need them. Obviously, you would get them if you prefer, and we get Mantis. So after turn 5, move all cards here to another random location. I'm gonna assume that my opponent does not want to engage with that, and I'm gonna try the middle zone. The strategy with Mantis is essentially, if you think your opponent won't like this zone that first gets exposed, don't play her there. Ideally, you'll either be wrong and get a power buff. In this case, I was wrong, Agent 13. Pretty solid card. Regardless, I still get 2 power on a zone. On turn 4, move all cards 1 location to the right. Well, yeah, this is going to be one of those matches, isn't it? So I'm going to try to get my Mr. Fantastic card here. Actually, I don't even know. After turn 4, move them all to the right. Yeah, so I'm going to try to place him here so that by turn 4, he moves there and he's guaranteed to hold down the Zener and buff all the zones. And then we'll figure out where we want to place the rest of our cards. This is a tougher one solely because these zones are really not giving us control of where we want to play our cards, which isn't our preference. But, you know, we'll do what we have to do. Oh, that's so he gets Baron Morpho and I get Onslaught for my next draw anyway. So Baron Morpho essentially did nothing because I drew into my level 6 card anyway. So you see, he's going to play Mr. Fantastic there. This does mean though that Fantastic's going to get pushed over by the end of turn 4 if he's aware of that. Cards can't be played there and he got Morpho. So essentially, I'm going to try to buff my middle zone with cards that I think would be most effective to combat. So I'm going to put Punisher here so that when these cards get pushed, if he does manage to get anything else in this zone, Punisher essentially will get the buff from them. He's guaranteed to at least get 1, and obviously Mantis, I can't really move her at this point. Then it depends whether or not any of our random cards from here end up there. So we have to see where those go. Oh, he's got Moon Girl also. Wonder if he's playing Double Dinosaur. I bet you he is. There, and then we have the buff for Mr. Fantastic. So we should pretty much be guaranteed to have the right zone in our grasp at this point. I don't have to play a card in the middle. I also have Double Dinosaur relatively early and a lot of cards in hand. What I'm going to do is, actually, because I have Onslaught, play him in the middle zone because I think I might be able to fight for and take this zone. Even though we didn't get our Moon Girl play, it depends whether or not he decides to drop Double Dinosaur as well. But if he needs to drop 2, he might have the advantage. And notice in this game, we didn't even need to steal any cards. We've just had the setup. All right, so I think he's praying that Double Dinosaur ends up in the right zone. But Double Dinosaur ends up in the middle contesting with ours. Which means now what I get to do is essentially multiply my Double Dinosaur. And I've just gotta hope that that's enough right now. Or I could essentially give up this zone and play Onslaught in another. So this is the 50-50 now. Are we going to contest where he tries to push for this? Or do we think, you know what, I'm gonna Onslaught and see what happens. We of course could have cabled and tried to buff by taking another card and then maybe dropped Captain America, but I think the double ongoing buff is just too much here. And we're gonna end up taking it because he played for the other zone. Yep, and so now we've got 32 and 10 and we take 2 zones and we won the 50-50. And that's game 1. That's a more controlled version of the deck where we didn't even really understand what we were dealing with there. And notice, even without, again, stealing all of his cards, we still have cards powerful enough to just dictate zones. Look at the power we have here solely from Double Dinosaur combined with Onslaught. And notice that Onslaught, while he's doubling all of our ongoing effects, is also boosting Mr. Fantastic, who is now giving our other zones +4, which means this zone became +10 and was even harder for him to contest, given he couldn't play any cards there. All right, again, a tough hand because we don't have any lower starting cards. And the Bifrost is just the zone tonight, isn't it? And another Agent 13 play early on. Not a zone I really want to contest with. I'm going to play Sentinel here because he's guaranteed. We don't know what this zone is, and so I'm taking a chance, but I do get another Sentinel to hand. And he's going to destroy his Squirrel Girl in the middle. Interesting play. He could have played her in either zone and had all 3 of them. I feel like that would have been more effective, but I don't have control over him. Destroy all cards here. Okay, so that's unfortunate. So what I'm gonna do ideally is put Mr. Fantastic here again, given the Bifrost zone, because while I'll be moving him to the middle zone, I won't be playing him there. That'll give me a buff to all zones and will also potentially, if he does not manage to get something there as well, if I can buff my left zone before he gets his stuff going. So he's gonna play Nightcrawler, which he has access to move, that's good. I'm gonna see what I can combo along with him there. I've got 1 more turn to drop something there, and assuming that he'll want to move the Nightwolf later, we've got Double Dino, but he's too far away from Moon Girl to get the double play, but I can give myself double Iron Man and get 6 power in this zone. So I'm gonna go ahead and make that play. I will get double Onslaught, but I won't have enough power to play him regardless. But I think the buff I'm gonna get from Mr. Fantastic is more helpful for me deciding what other zone I want to fight for. right, cool. Now everything shifts over. His Warpath is going to give me a problem, but if I don't have to fight for middle zone, I don't have to. We can double Dinosaur. I'm going to double Dinosaur this zone on the left. If he moves Nightcrawler over, it's only 2. He could drop something else there. I would just want to get some presence on the right-hand side. I don't think buffing the middle zone is worth. Place Cable and Sentinel here to get some power into that zone while also replacing them in hand to make sure a Dino still stays at his power. I think that's the best play that I have. Let's see what he drops. So again, we're going to take his Forge. Dino goes up in power. We're going to replace another Sentinel. Dino goes up in power. Did he drop anything big enough? He drops Khazar. Khazar's not going to buff in that zone. He's going to buff Nightcrawler, which he did not move. Power still too low, Mr. Sinister. Going to drop another Sinister. Going to tie us, and I believe... Do we have more power? I don't know if we do. We do. We take another game. I'm telling you, this deck has so much potential. Notice that the end game play, again, was reliant on the fact that we had cards that not only... Of course, we took from him an end game, meaning that what they did to him strategy-wise was not important, or her. What they did to our opponent strategy-wise wasn't as important. What was important for these plays was the fact that they padded our hand back out. So not only did I get to put presence on the board in that right-hand zone, I got to keep my buff on Devil Dinosaur, which was too big for his guard, given how he tried to spread his cards out too evenly, and I dictated which 2 zones I wanted to fight for. But also, Mr. Fantastic's buff, don't forget, is the reason that we have those zones, because it gave +3 here, which saved it from being even closer, and that +3 on the right zone, sorry, the +2 on the right zone is the reason that we even tied that zone, and then total we still had more power. All right, starting hand here, we've got Mantis in the beginning. Let's see the first zone. Cards here get +1 power. I would imagine that's a zone my opponent would want to fight for. I'm going to place Mantis there to try to get the draw. They had no cards. They're going to continue to get buffed throughout the game, which means that's the best zone to play them in. We get a random card to our hand, which benefits me for the Devil Dinosaur play later. I'm going to drop Cable and continue to fight for this zone. What does my opponent have now? I steal from them. Killmonger, which is such an RNG card to deal with in endgame. Killmonger will destroy all 1-cost cards, which means for me, he would only kill Mantis. But having to deal with that means I've taken away my opponent's ability to hit me with it later. Now I'm going to drop Fantastic in the middle, again, to optimize his buff, so I get 2 power to all zones as long as he sits there. Swordmaster means we're dealing with a destroyed deck, and Hulk is not the card that you would want to get mauled like that. Now Moon Girl is going to give me my devil play. So I'm going to fight for the mid zone and the left zone, I believe, is what I want to go for. We also have the Yondu play. We can steal another card, but because Devil Dinosaur's on the left, we are guaranteed to get a copy of him, which means I can now turn 5 and turn 6 drop double Devil Dino. What's his next card? Quicksilver, which does not look... Actually, I'm so confident that I'm going to snap on him. I think I'm about to snap off. So let me Devil Dino here, see what he plays, because he's going to need a lot of power to beat double Devil Dino. Again, it's not my problem to deal with. Jessica Jones is not going to be enough power there. And now watch as Dino gets the buff, and I place the second Dino here to secure this zone to make sure that there's nothing he can do there. We're going to have another +15, +17-ish Devil Dino. I'm horrible at math. I just know it's going to be a lot of power. Jessica Jones is going to get the buff. What does he have in the middle? Spider-Woman, which is going to reduce my power, but not by enough to give me a problem. And we get the Moon Girl Double Devil Dinosaur play. I'm so happy we worked in a game with the Double Devil Dino play. Say that 15 times fast. And we baited him for 4 cubes. It's just ridiculous. Now, we are going to need to talk a little bit about some of the personal picks you can make with a deck like this. So I'm hoping that the past 3 games showed great examples of what this deck is capable of when you have your combo, when you don't have your combo, and how to place your cards predicated on what exact zones you end up dealing with. But just for the sake of creativity and the fact that I would love you guys to let me know what builds you're running too, I'll show you some cards you can play instead of the cards that I'm playing if you'd like to make the deck more personal to you, or if you think there are better opportunities to optimize it, and then you can let me know how well they work for you. Let's go ahead and get into that, and then we'll sign off on the video. So some of the builds that I've ran before have been very effective. If you do not like Captain America, and of course we didn't get to see much of his use today, Ironheart is a decent replacement for him, because instead of buffing him, she will buff any other card randomly by 2, up to 3 of them. One of the biggest caveats I find with Ironheart is, one, the fact that you don't have control over who she's gonna buff, so she can win you as many matches as she loses you, and the fact that you have to place her in a zone knowing that she's going to be taking up a spot and not having a lot of power added to it, because you're essentially just going to buff all of your other cards. I find her to be a great turn 4 play because you can guarantee that all the 3 cards played before her will be buffed +2. But the farther it goes into the game, it's a little harder to run her. And she doesn't combo as well with somebody like Onslaught because, again, she's an on reveal effect instead of an ongoing effect, so she will not get doubled. You could also replace Onslaught with Spectrum if you would like to take that buff and spread it out more evenly throughout all of your ongoing cards instead of having to dictate it to one zone. Again, that's going to be a strategy preference between whether or not you want to super buff one of the zones you're playing for, or generally buff most of the cards you have out. Just keep in mind that your lower cards are on reveal cards in this build. So Spectrum is only going to benefit you if you get cards like Devil Dino and Iron and Onslaught out, or Mr. Fantastic and whatnot. She's not going to buff everything. So you have to be very, very mindful of the cards that she will buff to make sure you maximize her effect. White Queen is another card that I'm a big fan of, but even though I think she's one of the better 4 stars you could play for this deck, you do have other options. You can play Enchantress for this. The problem with Enchantress is, while it's such a great ability to shut down your opponent's ongoing effects when she's revealed, you have to keep in mind that you will be shutting down your own ongoing effects. So you will limit the spots in which you want to play her. If you have Devil Dino set up, you cannot play Enchantress in the same zone, otherwise you will murk the whole point of you playing Devil Dinosaur. And one of the other ones that I would potentially suggest, just because of how limited it is that you'll get to make super giant Iron Man plates on some occasions, you could potentially swap him out as a 5 cost for a card like Claw. Not only will Claw do such a great job in a zone, but the Onslaught effect will double, giving the zone to the right of you +6, making it a +12 zone. So essentially think of Mr. Fantastic on steroids. It's just that the card is so high cost that it's really hard to warrant placing him in endgame, but he can win condition you, again, by boosting a zone that, like in a game earlier, we weren't able to have access to. Note that game earlier where we could not play in a specific zone. Claw could have boosted that zone +6. That would have been very hard, even with our opponent having abilities to move cards into that zone to contest with. Claw and Mr. Fantastic both in the middle zone means that your right zone will gain +8 power just from them both being there. And if you Onslaught endgame, that is a 16, that's a 20 power buff with, let me see, 4 + 3 is 7 plus Onslaught. So it's 14 in your middle zone from all of those cards plus 20 in the zone next to it. That's very strong if you can get it set up. It just depends if that setup will win you the game. It won't always. And if Claw is in the right zone, if you don't have access to play him in another zone, or he gets randomly tossed into the right zone, there's no further right zone for him to boost, so you have to consider that. But I have messed around with him before and found him to be very effective. He's won me a couple of games, so he's another great card to consider. With all of that said, guys, I hope you are enjoying Marvel Snap as much as I am. If you like this video, again, please feel free to support it. I think I'm going to try to debut a Destroy build next. It's the next deck I want to go for. It's very fun. I've had a lot of problems dealing with Destroy decks. Though I've been able to beat them, they're pretty devious, and I want to do it myself. So if you like this, stay tuned. The next deck build will be on a Destroy build. Don't go anywhere and keep playing Marvel Snap. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.